Texas Governor Greg Abbott made national headlines on May 3, 2025, when he signed Senate Bill 2 into law, launching what is now the largest education savings account program in United States history, a sweeping and contentious $1 billion initiative that allows families to redirect taxpayer dollars away from the state's already underfunded public school system toward private education, homeschooling, or other approved educational expenses, with eligible students slated to receive up to $10,000 annually for private school tuition, $30,000 for students with disabilities, and $2,000 for homeschoolers, all funded through an initial $1 billion state allocation expected to rise dramatically to $4.5 billion annually by 2030. This move, hailed by its supporters as a parental rights revolution, marks a seismic shift in Texas education policy and has ignited fierce debate both inside the state and nationally about the future of public schooling in America, with critics warning it could gut already strained public schools and exacerbate educational inequality. To understand how Texas arrived at this moment, it's important to trace the political and social currents that led here, as Governor Abbott and conservative allies made school choice and parental control central themes of their education agenda following the COVID-19 pandemic and a series of high-profile controversies over curriculum, standardized testing, and school board accountability. Abbott's program prioritizes low-income families through a tiered eligibility system, with Tier 1 covering families earning up to 185% of the federal poverty level, which translates to $62,400 for a family of four, and Tier 2 extending benefits to middle-income families earning up to $156,000, though opponents like Representative Gina Hinojosa, a Democrat from Austin, argue the law is riddled with loopholes that disproportionately benefit wealthier families, pointing to data from Arizona and Florida's voucher programs, where over 60% of funds went to families who already had children enrolled in private schools prior to receiving taxpayer subsidies. Abbott's path to this legislative victory was anything but easy, requiring an aggressive and costly political campaign in which he spent over $12 million during the 2024 Republican primaries to unseat 15 anti-voucher GOP lawmakers, many of them rural representatives concerned about the devastating effects such a program could have on small-town school districts where public schools serve as both educational institutions and vital community centers. Even former President Donald Trump waded into the fight, declaring Texas ground zero in the national battle to save education, rallying conservative activists around the issue of school choice, while rural Republicans like Representative Glenn Rogers warned of potentially catastrophic consequences, predicting widespread school closures in sparsely populated districts like his, where over 90% of students rely on a single public campus for their K-12 education. Public school advocates estimate that the ESA program could siphon more than $350 million from public school coffers in its first year alone, setting off a so-called death spiral as each student's departure drains funding, triggers staff layoffs, and leaves remaining students with fewer resources and larger class sizes, compounding the challenges for communities already grappling with teacher shortages and crumbling facilities. Disability advocates also voiced alarm, pointing out that more than 70% of Texas private schools do not offer federally mandated accommodations for students with special needs, leaving families with disabilities fewer options despite the promise of increased funding. Supporters of the law, including conservative advocacy groups like the Libre Initiative and Texas Public Policy Foundation, argue that expanding school choice empowers parents, particularly low-income Hispanic families who have long been frustrated by chronically underperforming schools in urban districts like Houston ISD, which was taken over by the state in 2019 after more than 50 campuses failed to meet accountability standards for consecutive years. Voucher advocates cite polls indicating that 42% of Texas families support such programs as alternatives to public schools they perceive as failing or politically influenced. Though education experts like Dr. Jennifer Jennings of Princeton University warn that education savings accounts risk fueling what she terms hyper-segregation, pointing to Wisconsin's long-standing voucher program where racial and economic stratification increased by more than 35% after implementation, disproportionately concentrating poor, Black, and Latino students in the remaining public schools. Meanwhile, logistical challenges loom large, with the Texas Comptroller tasked with designing and administering the ESA system by May 2026. A daunting feat, given that dozens of rural counties like Presidio, with a population of just 6,200, have no private schools within reasonable driving distance, while urban demand for top-tier private institutions in Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio already outpaces supply, with wait lists exceeding 2,000 students at some campuses. Critics argue that the program's design inherently privileges families with the resources and proximity to access private education, leaving behind those in isolated or impoverished areas, and warn that as public school enrollment shrinks, state funding formulas tied to attendance will force remaining schools into deeper financial crisis. Legal challenges are already underway, with the Texas State Teachers Association and a coalition of public education advocates filing a lawsuit in state court, alleging that Senate Bill 2 violates the Texas Constitution's requirement to fund public education adequately and efficiently, and unlawfully diverts funds intended for public schools to private entities without sufficient oversight or accountability. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has vowed to defend the law in court, framing the fight as a battle for parental freedom and the future of educational innovation, echoing recent conflicts in Tennessee and Georgia, where state voucher programs faced court-ordered suspensions over equity and access concerns. As debate intensifies, protests have erupted at the Texas Capitol, with more than 10,000 teachers, parents, and students rallying in opposition to the law, arguing that privatization efforts threaten to dismantle the public education system that serves 5.5 million Texas children. The controversy has also ignited a broader national conversation, with Republican lawmakers in over a dozen states introducing similar school choice bills modeled after Texas's ESA program. While congressional Democrats are rallying behind the Public Education Reinvestment Act, a proposed $200 billion federal initiative aimed at offsetting state-level education cuts and modernizing public school infrastructure nationwide. Analysts describe Texas's new law as a pivotal experiment with profound implications for American education, with both advocates and critics agreeing that its outcomes could shape policy debates for a generation. Key questions persist about whether the program will meaningfully improve educational outcomes for disadvantaged students, how private institutions will be held accountable for the public funds they receive, and whether shifting public dollars into private hands can coexist with the constitutional promise of free, equitable public education for all. In the meantime, Texas parents are urged to carefully review eligibility requirements, application deadlines, and school availability as the program rolls out in phases over the next 2 years, with pilot enrollments expected to open by fall 2026. As both sides brace for protracted legal, political, and cultural battles, education watchers nationwide are keeping a close eye on Texas, viewing the state as a bellwether for the future of school choice, public funding, and parental rights in the United States. While civil rights organizations caution that unchecked voucher expansion could entrench systemic inequalities and undermine the very foundations of American public schooling, the debate strikes at the heart of what it means to guarantee equal opportunity in a country where zip code and household income too often determine a child's educational destiny, and whether the promise of school choice is a path to liberation or a mask for privatization. Regardless of one's position, what's clear is that the Texas ESA law represents not only a landmark policy shift, but also a flashpoint in the ongoing struggle to define the role of public education in a modern, diverse, and deeply divided nation.